Today we will review the results of an experiment that Hall and Partners and the behaviour architects conducted to understand the effectiveness of behavioural economics on increasing patient adherence. We are proud to say that this webinar is based on the JH annual winner for Best Paper at FEMRA 2014 annual conference, and it is a finalist for the AQR Prosper Riley Smith Qualitative Excellence Award. Today's presenters are Aurora Albert, Behavioural Insights Director at Hall and Partners, and Crawford Hollingworth, founder of the Behavioural Architects. Please feel free to type in questions throughout, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. We will email each of you links to a downloadable copy of the presentation and a recording of today's session after the webinar has concluded. I'd now like to hand you over to Aurora Albert.
Thank you, Jordan, and thanks all for joining us today. And I would like to start by briefly going back to how this journey started for us at Hall and Partners, mainly working for healthcare clients. As an industry, it seems that we're now all on board with recognizing the critical role of the patient in determining a treatment success or failure. We know that the decision to prescribe is no longer solely that of the physician. Patients are becoming increasingly influential. They seek more information about their health, they understand more about their condition, and importantly, they form opinions on treatment approaches and happily share those with other patients. Indeed, the digital era we live in provides a fertile ground for patient empowerment as well as new ways to influence patient behaviours. Many networks we know develop organically, take on a life on their own, and provide patients with the opportunity to take ownership of their health, share their experience, and influence each other. Our industry has and still is largely adapting to this new dynamic and aiming to integrate the voice of the customer throughout the drug life cycle and connect with patients beyond the pill. In this context, behavioural change certainly is, according to our clients, one of the greatest, if not the ultimate challenge faced by the pharma industry. It represents an immense opportunity to create value for patients. So that's just not only optimizing their experience, but engaging with them in a way that actually influences more positive behaviours. But the problem with people, in fact with all of us, is that we seldom do what is good for us. So if you listen to this webinar, the likelihood is that you're educated about the necessity to look after your health and follow your doctor's guidance on medications, but can we actually comply with our own advice? Well, I'd like you to take a moment and think about the last time you were prescribed a course of antibiotics. Most likely you have been asked to take pills twice a day for a 5-day period. So if you just think about this time and try to remember how good you were in sticking to this instruction. A study completed in Spain in 2012 demonstrated that about 30% only of patients achieved a satisfactory adherence level. So that's reaching 80% of all the defined adherence outcomes, so sticking to the number of pills, the number of days, and the number of times a day where pills need to be taken. This data is obviously related to an actually pretty straightforward situation, 5-day course of antibiotics. So let's imagine what this could mean within the context of chronic diseases. National Health Services estimate that between 1/3 and 1/2 of all medicines prescribed for long-term conditions are not used as recommended. So yes, people don't always do what is good for them, and we make illogical decisions and often fail to act in our own self-interest. As an agency, we had actually become increasingly fascinated by the reasons for this less than rational decisions that we as people are making, and the role of the unconscious in individual decision making. So we ask ourselves the question, can we actually use this understanding to not only better understand patients, but also to actually influence their behaviour, thereby supporting better health outcomes? So we partner up with Crawford and his team to bring the best of our collective minds together and explore the potential of using behavioural economic frameworks to increase patient compliance in type 2 diabetes. I shall hand over to Crawford.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Thank you, Aurora, for our introduction there. So we're very excited to work on this project. And what I want to do is start a little bit by talking about behavioural economics and why it's such an interesting and exciting science to embrace. In essence, behavioral economics gives us a new scientific model, a new model for thinking about human behavior, for thinking about human psychology. And it's a model which we love because it embraces and seeks to explain the seeming irrationalities of human behavior. As I think you saw, the antibiotic example is a great example of kind of irrational human behavior. It's sort of like, well, they started taking their meds and then they stopped. And more importantly, the frameworks and concepts it's based on are heavily researched by science, and it's incredibly empowering to have that sort of scientific underpinning in order to think about behavior and to think about behavioral change. And everything we've talked about today has incredible amounts of scientific evidence behind it. So what we're going to talk about today is our particular approach to type 2 diabetes. And in this particular study, we came up with 3 really interesting methodological stages to unlock these deep, penetrating behavioral insights around what we call non-adherence. And then, once you've understood the sort of blueprint, the kind of DNA of that non-adherence, what are the ways that we can nudge and steer behavior, those lovely terms, nudge and steer behavior, nudge and steer that adherence. I want to walk you through these 3 stages that you can see on this chart. So, stage 1 is one of the most interesting, I think, stages in any project, which is developing a set of deeply rooted behavioral hypotheses around what is actually going on. What are the barriers that we think exist for drug adherence and healthier lifestyle within these type 2 diabetes patients? And the BE principle really is, again, as I was saying earlier, you're doing this because you need to spend time thinking about what is the current architecture of behavior, what is the current blueprint before you can change it. And we ran this incredibly inspiring, I wish you'd all been there, most wonderful kind of cross-discipline session. We had academics, we had doctors, we had behavioral scientists, literally bringing this wonderful collective knowledge to create a list of hypotheses around drug adherence and lifestyle changes. What is going on out there? Why are people not adherent? And I'm sure you realize in diabetes too, people think there could be up to 50 to 60% of people who are non-adherent. It's a very high level. And we came up with this kind of really interesting long list of all these sort of behavioral things that could be going on. And then obviously we had to reduce it to a short list. So as a group of experts, we decided what are the most interesting behavioral hypotheses that we could actually focus on. And let me tell you a couple of those just to bring it alive. So, I mean, the first one is a kind of really kind of simple one, but listening to patients and looking at research, particularly in this diabetes type 2, people talked about the lack of tangible rewards for taking their medicines, you know. The benefits are invisible, and that's kind of hard because psychologically people look for tangible rewards, you know, in terms of creating that kind of behavioral chemistry. Secondly, I mean, let's be honest, the positive feedback around the benefits, again, you know, are in fact pretty negative. In fact, if you often start your meds, you know, some of the first feedback you'll get is probably flatulence and the feeling of nausea. So it's not exactly very powerful, and it's kind of easy to see on occasions why people may drift off. Another really critical one we debated for quite a long time, because we see a lot of this in terms of newspapers and articles, but there is a general sort of lack of social acceptance around diabetes. And to be honest, we actually think it's a bit of a blame culture. You know, it's sort of people think, oh, it's their fault, it's what they do, it's a lifestyle choice even. And people are really conscious of that. And to be honest, you know, I'm slightly embarrassed by it, which is why, going down to the middle bottom one, why people also who suffer from diabetes tend to have a real lack of positive patient identity. You know, it's almost something they want to hide away with because of, you know, what society thinks, because of that blame culture. And, you know, so it's basically, oh, I don't want to mention it, I'm a little bit embarrassed. And that's a really interesting behavioural insight. As is the one bottom left, really, which, you know, again, it's like when you're taking long-term medication, it's really hard to grasp the long-term impact both of taking it and of not taking it. So there's a lot of interesting behavioural studies where you go, I'll start taking it properly in a couple of years' time. People not understanding the impact on their body of doing that. So again, it's that, you know, it's easy to, you know, kick the proverbial can down the road. Moving to just on the right-hand side, another really interesting one. There's no one on this call today who doesn't realise that it's really hard to resist temptation. I start New Year every year, New Year's Day, by giving up alcohol until lunchtime, and we all recognise, temptation. In fact, I think one of the things, the hardest thing, is cake today rather than worrying about the future. And a lot of people here talks about how it's easy to cheat oneself because, and also to pretend that everything's okay because, oh, I did it today, I'll sort it out tomorrow. So trying to understand that the power of temptation is really important. And the final one is if you have other people who are a bit worried about putting drugs into their body, it's bad for me, or that sort of belief, the body will correct itself, this beautiful body will sort itself out, I don't need to worry. And so all these really powerful behavioural facts on this sheet, these sort of 7 ones we focused on, are incredibly powerful drivers of non-adherence to both lifestyle and to taking your meds. Now, what you do in a classic behavioural economic study like this, you then say, okay, let's look at these key hypotheses and let's put them through a behavioural economics filter. What I mean by that is let's try and look at some of the wonderful concepts and frameworks that behavioural economics gives us, heuristics, choice architecture, framing, anchors, all these great kind of explanations of subconscious influences of behaviour, and see if they help us make sense of some of those deeply interesting and worrying behavioural hypotheses, which is what we did. And we came up with 7 powerful behavioural economics concepts, 7 powerful scientific concepts, which actually help us a deeper understanding of some of those barriers to lifestyle change and adherence. Let me walk you through them without giving a lot of depth on each of the BE concepts. I'm assuming a level of knowledge here. I hope that's right. But let's start with top left. Patients are incredibly daunted by the idea of someone saying to you, oh, you need to change your lifestyle. It's really easy to say, oh, I need you to take these meds a number of times a day. It's a big change, it's a big task, and people essentially when they're presented, we know behaviourally, when you're presented with a big task, the bigger it is, the more likely you are not to do it. And there's a concept called mental chunking. It actually was developed mainly around finance, but it's very relevant to healthcare, which shows that you break things up into meaningful chunks and allow people to understand their progress along them, then people find big changes in tasks extremely easy or much easier to do. So at the moment we think, can we use mental chunking to help these patients towards their lifestyle and drug adherence needs? Number 2, moving to the right, the power of now. Now you're all realizing why I was talking about cake today. And the power of now is, if we all suffer from, we make a good plan in what we call a cold, rational time, a cold, rational zone. This is me, New Year's Day. And suddenly in the hot emotional zone, it falls apart because someone offers you a biscuit, or something happens that changes things. And, there are reasons why we have phrases like the plans of mice and men. It's why diets fail so often, etc. And in behavioural economics terms, we have a tendency to discount the future, and some great studies looking at that, in terms of the power of now. We love the power of now, and the future is the future, so hard to grasp today. No presentation can be complete without a Mark Twain quote. Giving up smoking is the easiest thing in the world, I know. I've given it up 100 times this week. So it kind of brings that alive. The next one, moving to the right, is really related to this, this idea that lack of positive patient identity and sense of blame culture. This is really about the social norms. People feel that they're on the outside, people are looking at them, they're not part of the norm, and it's incredibly powerful social norms. In fact, we even know that if you feel you're different to people, areas of your brain light up in activity, kind of anxiety areas, because you feel kind of upset, you don't feel part of it. And again, these people really don't feel part of it. They're not part of the social norm, they're not part of the herd, and this can really impact on them. Let's go down one to behavioural commitment. Behavioural commitment, or what is known in behavioural economics terms as a commitment bias, is an extraordinarily powerful behavioural concept. And very simply it means it's easier, we know it's much easier to speak the speak than walk the walk, okay? And we all do it. We all give a lot of words and often don't follow it through. we see why attitudes can often change and not connect to behaviour. The brilliant thing about the commitment bias is essentially it says the more you do something, the more you behaviourally commit to something, the much more likely it is to come true. And it's kind of, if I get someone to do it, I say, shake my hand on it, read it back to me, write it down. Getting anyone to do those activities means what you're asking them to do is much more likely to take place. And that's why it works really well on kids, or my wife uses it very well on me. If I move to the left-hand side, the other thing which we've seen within these wonderful patients is they feel this kind of lack of feedback or lack of feeling of progress. And this falls very much into the heart of habit formation, which is very core to behavioural theory. And in habit formation, you need triggers to create a routine, and you need rewards. You need neural habit loops. And if you don't give feedback, essentially it's much harder for people to develop habit loops, which is critical for adherence. And again, going down, this isn't helped also by the fact that our brains are wired to hate change. We love the status quo. We hate change, and we do anything to avoid change. So getting me to do something different, my whole body, my whole brain is fighting against it, and that kind of that status quo bias is there going, no, don't change. And we have to really fight that. Moving from sort of more, those kind of some very specific behavioural concepts, but there's some more general ones which are really important here as well, and that help to explain adherence. And one is this kind of little day-to-day conscious or subconscious nudges. What we've learned, as Daniel Kahneman would say, we are so susceptible to tiny ways of sort of priming or nudging. We call it behavioural priming, which are little subconscious primes that maybe the colour red that makes you think of a Coke. It doesn't. It works in many, many different ways. But these kind of subconscious behavioural primes that suddenly make you do something, and it's incredibly powerful. But in this area, we often give patients a number of objectives and don't think enough about how do we give them little day-to-day subconscious or even conscious nudges that make them potentially take their meds or go to that lifestyle changes. We know it's one of the most powerful behavioural assets we get. In any patient care, in any consumer-facing thing we do, know your primes, know how to use these subconscious primes. And finally, another one which is incredibly important is this idea of visual salience. It's the bottom right-hand corner here, or system 1. What we know is if something at the moment, like for these patients, things aren't top of mind, visual saliency is so important. Visual saliency is what we call a system 1 shortcut. It's, people have to have shortcuts to bring things to mind quicker, to remind them they need to lifestyle change or take their drugs. And system 1, by the way, is the way your brain works. It's quick, emotional, it's instant, it's like, you do it without thinking. It's incredibly important. And thinking about how we help these patients have more salience, more system 1, is incredibly important. So we then took these extraordinary concepts and said, okay, so that gives us a really interesting, scientifically based understanding about what is currently going on with behaviour. So what do we now take that understanding? What do we take these concepts and think, what are the things we could do with our patients to help them adhere to their lifestyle changes and them adhere to the drugs they need to take? And we came up with essentially 3 really exciting intervention ideas. We call them behavioural interventions. They are essentially really simple behavioural ways of hopefully nudging and steering behaviour in the way you want. Now, ideally, we're going to use all 3 of these. Ideally, in some random controlled trials, you might separate them out and you'd evaluate each of them against a control so you understand the power of them. What you'll see is the combined power, but you'll be incredibly impressed by that. That's a bit of priming for later. So if you take concept 1, this is a really simple thing. So remember, we've got a behavioural insight, which was in a cold, rational moment, it's easy to ignore what you promised to do because of a hot emotional zone. Now, what we've also said is we've got this wonderful concept called the commitment bias. It's such a powerful concept. Science has said the more people commit. So why don't we try and leverage this with these patients? Why don't we try and deploy some sort of commitment device from them that says they will do what they said they're going to do. They will take their meds, they will do whatever lifestyle changes they've agreed to. Now, we call this rather beautifully a promise contract, a behavioural promise contract. It works incredibly powerful, and there's lots of evidence from gym going to gym pack to dieting to lots of different things. Something signed by patients, and if we have time at the end, we can talk more about this. We then had a second intervention, number 2. So again, remember that lovely insight we talked about earlier? Patients can see their illness, as a personal issue. It's my illness. It's got nothing to do with anyone else. They're a bit embarrassed about it. It doesn't have an impact on anyone else either, positive or whatever. And so there's a whole idea of kind of locking it up. So let's look at those 2 concepts we talked about a moment ago. Visual saliency. How can we help them bring to mind some visual which will prime them to have an impact on their behaviour, will remind them of something that will have an impact on the behaviour. Remember that system 1, that system, quick, intuitive, subconscious impact. Number 2, let's talk about this word priming again. How can we create a prime that makes them think about someone else, thinks about something that makes, oh, I must take my meds, I must stick to the plan, I must do my lifestyle changes. And by the way, primes can be smells, they can be words, they can be images, they can be anything. There's, in fact, I think there's about 17 levels of priming. It's just knowing the ones that work most effectively. So we had a really cool idea here, was, hey, actually, they don't think it's anyone else's problem, and it's not being reminded. Well, why don't we basically, 2 birds with 1 stone, as they say, increase the visual saliency of a family member or a loved one. So simple. Why don't we think about it, maybe a photo or whatever, but how do we take a picture of a family member and a loved one, and that will create a visual and a verbal, it'll create a visual prime, and we'll work on those 2 different levels. It will actually share, it will mean that your illness is also connected to someone else, but it will also remind you that of your meds and what you need to do. So really, really powerful. And the third one, always good to have thinking 3. We have a behavioural insight. Change is hard. We all love the status quo. And also, the size of the goal, remember the chunking, can seem like an impossible climb. That mountain is just too high. So again, 2 concepts, 2 beautiful BE concepts. Chunking, how do we break the change or the period of time into manageable chunks so people feel a sense of momentum, a sense of achievement, a sense of progress, which also will feed into that, remember that great neural loop, because that feedback is critical to establish that behavioural routine. So again, what we're going to do there is we're going to look at ways, how do we chunk up the journey? How do we set goals for these people over a number of weeks so they feel that progress day by day? How do we build a response or a feedback mechanism that actually becomes part of their daily neural feedback and will build these positive lifestyle and drug-taking habits over a period of time? So some pretty wonderful interventions, but also very simple and all with a great scientific underpinning. We then obviously we decided we had to put it into action. It's great to have a theory, and we actually created what we call is an intervention poster, a BE-inspired intervention poster. And what we said to our patients is, we want you to, obviously there's a control period, so there's people who don't have the poster, we'll have to contrast again for a period of time. But for 2 weeks, we wanted people to have a poster which would use these concepts to try and influence their behaviour. And it's a really simple poster, and we want it to be displayed prominently, ideally on a fridge. Fridges are really useful. If that's slightly too public, at least in the family bathroom or bathroom shared by others, or even bedroom. And let me take you through this rather wonderful design. As you can see, and I'm sure a lot of you recognise some of the clever tricks being used here. Tricks is probably the wrong term, but these subconscious influences. So I'm going to build them for you here. At the top of this page, you'll see what we talked about before. These are images of a loved one, the eyes of a loved one, the face of a loved one. And again, we know from research this primes or encourages good behaviour. It dials up the kind of, the feeling there's other people involved, other people are watching me, this visual saliency, this system 1 shortcut. This has been used, by the way, by lots of people. The American government use these eyes to make us pay our taxes on time, which obviously is very upsetting. If we move to the second level down, you can see this chart. I hope you can see it. You've got medication, you've got healthy lifestyle over 14 days. Obviously, we'd like to run it further, but this was a trial. And what you can see is the image of a smiley face. Now, what happened here is we allowed you daily stickers. You can have a happy sticker, you can have a neutral sticker, or a sad smiley face. And every day, you have to decide, morning and night, every day, whether you are going to get a smiley face because you've been good, a neutral face because you've kind of been neither good or a bad face. Now imagine suddenly you're seeing this journey and you're seeing those smiley faces building. That's mentally chunking a journey. It's giving you immediate priming and reward and feedback. Chunking, priming, neural habit loop. Loads of really powerful concepts in an incredibly simple mechanism. The final one, which is again incredibly important, and I probably should have started with this at the bottom, because to start with, we did this promise contract, which as now everyone on the call knows is the commitment bias. But what we did here is we got people to set their goals. What are their realistic personal goals in lifestyle change and drug adherence? So they are setting the benchmark that they want to achieve. And that's really important as opposed to us telling them they have to do something. And what is, if you could see this, I know it's a bit small here, the other really clever thing is a promise contract. Look at the heart and shaking of hands is you sign it, which is one level of behavioural commitment, and then your loved one also signs it, which is another level of behavioural commitment. So incredibly simple, 3 interventions turned into a rather wonderful poster. So you've seen the thought, you've seen the behavioural theory, you've seen the concepts, you've seen the creative work that's now going into the trial, and I'm going to pass you back over to Aurora to take you through the experiment.
Thank you, Prophet. Thank you very much for also giving so much away from your alcohol, behaviour and married life. Very informative, thank you. So research allowed us to inform the behavioural hypothesis workshop, and based on this, design our intervention inspired by those brilliant behavioural economic concepts. And then we went back to research to actually understand, test our hypothesis, understand whether this was working, and size the effect of our intervention. So our research approach. So patients with type 2 diabetes who had to take their medication twice daily. The reason why obviously we focused on type 2 diabetes patients is because this is an area where knowingly patients are struggling, and there's also high stakes because this has a high cost to society. And then we focused on patients with that had to take pills twice a day. But we also screened ensuring that people were conscious that they were not doing great with adherence, and they show a level of motivation, a will to actually do better. And then we, in total, we recruited 26 type 2 diabetes patients. Right, so our first research challenge maybe was that we needed to monitor patient engagement to try and assess their base level and compliance over a significant period of time. So the research went on for a total of 33 days. However, this is a slightly paradoxical position because we need to be as invisible as possible and being the fly on the wall, not interfere or as little as possible with respondents' natural behaviour, because we know that people behave more correctly when they are being paid attention to. But we also needed to ensure we kept participants engaged. It was a fairly long study, more than a month, and interested so that they could complete the entire study and we could limit drop-off and ensure validity of our measure. We therefore had some strategic decisions to make regarding our study design. The way we went on about this is firstly to use a mobile phone reporting app. So we teamed up with our online NeuroWeb platform to monitor participants each day in the least intrusive way. So participants were asked to answer a few simple questions every day about their treatment and their lifestyle, which took them literally seconds to complete. We also felt it was important to offer flexibility in our approach. to allow people of a variety of ways they could participate in the study and engage with us. So we had tele-depth interview to start with in the middle, and at the end of the experiment, we had optional ethnographic style questions through our daily mobile app, and a choice of both private and public forums. So people could share their experience in a way which felt more natural for them, and also allowed us to explore response from various angles. And finally, we endeavoured to keep respondents interested, and that was a challenge. And one of our fears to start with, we wanted to limit drop-off and reduce levels of respondent fatigue by posting additional fun questions on the mobile app, organising weekly raffle prize, and offering loads of personal encouragement. So this is our methodological challenge, and this is how we've addressed it with our experiment. So participants were assessed over a 2-week control period, following which the intervention, so our poster, lovely poster presented earlier by Crawford, was introduced. And they were then again monitored for a further 2 weeks. During this entire period, participants were monitored in terms of how successful they were in achieving a healthy lifestyle. So we had an overall measure of how they thought they were doing, and we were also asking about their diet and their level of activity. And obviously, of course, how compliant they were in taking their medication. So both in terms of whether they actually took the medication, and if so, they did as instructed. So the right number of pills at the right number at the right time during the day. So we monitored participants with a short, self-monitored, very short daily questionnaire that you can see here using our mobile app. So this is the design, and I'm soon going to show you the results, the quantitative results almost of this experience. But firstly, I sort of wanted to walk you through the experience for us, and the realization at some point during the experiment that we actually set ourselves a tough challenge. Firstly, engagement levels of the participants with their condition and treatment were actually higher than anticipated. They were motivated to engage with the moderators, which we didn't want to, because we didn't want to change their behaviour. We didn't want them to do it for us, and we wanted them to be as natural as possible. But they all had ambitions to improve their health, and so very quickly they were saying that this was helping them even in that control period. So we thought we really set ourselves a tough challenge. Furthermore, obviously by monitoring their health daily, their engagement actually increased naturally during the control period. We know that just simply looking at people, monitoring them introduces a behavioural bias, which is almost impossible to avoid. And altogether, it made it harder for us to show an increase in engagement levels during the intervention versus the control period. So we faced those difficulties, and we really thought we didn't know what we would expect in terms of results. So maybe if we ask you, I think there's a quick poll that will show on your screen at the moment. What level of change in adherence do you think was observed during the intervention period? Let's be optimistic and give you only positive values. So plus 15%, plus 30%, or plus 45%. Right, I think we have about 20 seconds to, you have about 20 seconds to complete the poll.
This is exciting. Real-time voting.
Exactly. So the greatest one is plus 15%. So this is what you're actually expecting in terms of. Oh, it's changing. Oh, it's gone on to 30%. Well, let's see.
No, it's still 50.
Ah, it's 15%. Okay. So 44% of you expect a change in level of adherence, an increase of 15%. Wow. Actually. Yeah. Over 45%.
How many people said that? And against, and 39% of you said 30%, and only 17% of you said 45%. Wow.
Wow. So I think you probably are as surprised as we were thrilled, actually.
Even though I primed you in the call earlier by saying of the extraordinary results, you see.
So incredibly, the intervention resulted in a significant increase in healthy behaviour of more than 45%. So this measure reflects the increase in the top 2 boxes on the 7-point scale in response to the question, how healthy was your diet today? and that's showing a 45% increase. And the question, how active were you today? Again, at 1 to 7 point scale, showing a 51% increase in the top 2 dots. So what does this mean actually for people? Well, that means real change for real people. As you can see from these quotes, people recorded how they were becoming more active, walking more, watching their diet and losing weight. We've had some really fantastic feedback, and hopefully we will show you later a video with actually some box pops and actually direct testimony from those participants. So how about compliance then? How about compliance with medication? Well, 70% of the participants in the survey showed an uplift in compliance, either so taking their pills more regularly or at the correct time, so having a significant positive change in their behaviour. And again, this is despite being monitored and being on their best behaviour for the last 2 weeks. So their behaviour, their adherence already increased during the control period, but still, this increased still significantly during the intervention period, which really totally impressed us. Of the remaining 8 respondents that showed no improvement, it's important to know that half of them had already demonstrated very high levels of compliance in the control period, so it was harder to show any improvement. And the other 4 just simply didn't respond to the poster, so it didn't work for them. So if we try to size this effect and go back to those 70% of people who actually showed an improvement, a significant improvement in compliance, drug compliance level, they demonstrated full compliance, that is perfect compliance, so taking all their pills at the right time as instructed, more than 80% of the time. So this compares with full compliance in the control period of less than 60%. So you can see on the right-hand side there on the chart in green, full compliance increased to more than 80% during the intervention. So how the poster worked in their own words. So again, these are more verbose information. What I will do now is you feel free to read those quotes. That I will hand it back to Crawford, who will sort of bring to life what these verbatim means in terms of behavioural economics and how we can read them through a BE lens.
Hi everyone again. Yeah, no, we were so thrilled by the level of impact. Obviously a small sample, but just showing the sort of the power that behavioural economics can have. One of the most interesting things is to listen, obviously, to real consumer language, and then try to tie it back into the behavioural economic concepts that we've leveraged in the study. And so and I'm sure you probably all become experts at this because of things we've said earlier. But I'll just give you a quick look at these. I'm going to, yeah, I'm going to the next one. It's really interesting when you just tie these back in. Like, if I defaulted my promise, I'd have to put a sticker there for everyone to see. Again, that's a really critical feedback loop. If people are getting that feedback, they don't want to see a negative sticker. They don't want anyone else to see a negative sticker. They see a positive sticker, they feel good, other people feel good, and it keeps working. Going on to the right-hand side, I could plot over the fortnight just how I was doing. This importance of mental chunking and breaking a journey up into manageable chunks. It's very easy. So what's that line? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It's that same sort of kind of thinking, really. And going down, it's good to have a visible incentive to look at. This is classic System 1 saliency, visual saliency, something that's easy to bring to mind and has a very quick subconscious influence of behaviour, and also will work on this habit loop. As will the line, I was constantly reminded I owed it to my children to take care of myself. You see that? A shared behavioural responsibility. It's no longer just my disease. I realise that other people are involved, and that's a beautiful piece of subconscious priming. And on to the left, promote a front of mind the importance of establishing good practice. Again, this is not just about tackling status quo, which of course that does. It keeps reminding you, because you're breaking a habit, you need to be reminded not to carry on as you are. It's also about countering in a highly salient way, because it's saliency here as well. It's trying to counter the power of now. It's trying to actually not make you discount the future. And again, it's a really kind of simple mechanism. And the final thing is that, on the left-hand side, the power of the commitment bias. stickers there for everyone to see. Kept my focused on my objectives. I'd written my objectives down. I'd signed the promise contract, and it's a beautiful piece. If you look at that one chart, it's just sort of essentially behavioural chemistry. It's lots of things working, many at the subconscious level, to nudge and steer people towards the change in adherence we saw in both lifestyle and drug taking. Very inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you, Crawford. So I think we're going to try to show you a video just to bring to life really those quotes and understand how the poster's been working for participants and what impact it had on their lives.
Well, the bad thing was, normally I meant to take my meds around 8 o'clock in the morning when I get up, but I got so busy with the kids yesterday that I didn't get to take my morning meds until about noon.
Hi, it's Tuesday today. Unfortunately, that's the second day running that I've forgotten my tablets. I don't really know what's happened there. But I remembered them in the end, but it was much later than I was supposed to take them. Apart from that, it's not been a great day because I haven't managed to get much exercise either. I seem to be flat out with work at the moment. Hopefully tomorrow will be better.
I think doing the survey over the last couple of weeks has made things stick in my mind, like doing diet or controlling diet and having exercise on my plan for the day. I haven't always succeeded in doing it, but it is in here to think about, and when I've been shopping I've looked more carefully at what I've bought.
Sean here, just answering the last question. Certainly the last couple of weeks has been really good for me. I have taken most of my medication on time, in fact pretty much all of it. I'm leading a healthier lifestyle, and certainly the research has given me something to focus on and brought my attention to the fact that I need to do these things. So yeah, all good.
I have been challenged though, I have to say. I've really been challenged to consider how bad I've been at taking my medication, at watching what I eat, and the complete lack of exercise that I've been doing. Things are going to change, because one thing that this study's made me realise is that I cannot keep my head in the sand any longer. I have to do something about this. So I bought a cross-country trainer for here at the house, and I've even joined a gym. I can't believe it, but I've joined a gym and I try to eliminate all sugar from my diet, so I'm going to do my very best to look after myself. I owe this to my children, if nothing else. So yeah, so that's what I've learned.
So we have...
I was going to say, how many ever, the amount of times I've looked at those people talking, and it's just, they are such wonderful people and wonderful quotes as well, but just wonderful. It makes my, it makes me warm every time I see them. I love them, Sean in his blanket. Anyway, sorry I was interrupted.
So we have had a few questions come throughout. Someone has asked, do you not think that the success of this lies in the relatively short period?
Yeah, I can try and answer that a little bit. I mean, I think that the level of success would not continue at that level. I think it would be unlikely. I think that ideally you'd want to, it certainly wouldn't decrease, and a lot of studies that I've seen, that obviously you get can get quite a high initial impact, and it can then fall back. But I've seen really interesting stuff like getting people to read, where you might have a 80% increase, but even after a year time, it's still at sort of 40%. So there is chances that things fall back. I think that it relies on us not just using the same mechanisms, but thinking creatively. The concepts will still work always, but thinking creatively about how do you execute them and keep that fresh is important. But also, my final point, you think about how habits form. Habits can take quite a few weeks to form, and so sometimes it'd be good to run interactions or interventions with consumers and patients over maybe 4 or 6 weeks, by which stage the habit would hopefully be quite embedded. Would be my answer there.
Yeah, if I can actually build on this, we have some data out there. If we look at October, for example, about creating new habits and the fact that if you stop for 5 weeks, then you're 5 times more likely to stop for good. So we know it helps. I think there's 2 things to keep in mind. First, obviously, this intervention was designed as an experiment to understand the power of behavioural economics. So it was not designed as something that needs to work in the long term. And probably, if we had this in mind, we would have looked at maybe different interventions, or maybe different people at different times. I think thinking about a client from a pharmaceutical industry background, we also have to ask ourselves where the opportunity lies to help people engage better with their condition and medication, and that might be focusing on certain people at certain times, rather than hopefully changing everyone's behaviour forever. And also, as an interesting point, and just for your curiosity, maybe you'll join another webinar in a few months, because we're actually looking into doing the follow-up of this study, so 6 months down the line, calling back with people and see how they've used the posture, whether that actually made any change, and where they are with that intervention 6 months down the line.
Someone else has asked, what role does qualitative research play in this experiment and changing behaviours?
So if I start for that one, I think the first thing is, if you want to have any chance to convince people to do something different, you have to understand why they do what they do to start with, and why they're not doing it. So the first step is to build a comprehensive picture of their current behaviour and the meanings of this behaviour, and then the influences on those behaviours in their social and cultural context. So of course, people are not always good judges of why they do what they do, and maybe if they are, maybe they're not always telling the truth, but they have a perspective, and putting all together those perspectives help building a comprehensive picture. Importantly, I think now we have methodologies that allow us to sort of step into people's shoes and suppress our own agenda, to really immerse ourselves in their world. We have digital diaries, we have ethnographies, we simply have methodologies, moderation methodology, that allow us to have more conversation with people rather than asking them a long list of questions and using enabling techniques. So I really think research has a role to play in sort of understanding what's happening on a human, but also on a social and cultural lens with behaviour, so we can then read them on with a behavioural economic lens.
So I'm going to add a little bit on that. So behavioural architects, so most of our work around consumer qualitative research will be trying to understand what is the behavioural journey. So a lot of the research you would do is longitudinal and not focus groups. And what you would try to do is a lot of behaviour influence is subconscious. So like in any sort of psychotherapeutic or whatever situation, you need to spend time thinking about how you help the people you're working with surface insight into themselves, because they themselves won't know. So over time, longitudinal research, given different disruptive techniques to try to help us see and then see insights in themselves, is what behavioural economics and behavioural-led research would probably ask you to do, and also, as Aurora says, using a lot of the new sort of techniques that we can, a lot of mobile techniques, we fit into their lives, not them into our lives. But just think about it as a behavioural journey, think about it over time, think about it, how do you use techniques to surface that deep subconscious behavioural insights.
And we just have one last question. Have you seen other powerful behavioural economics impacts in pharma recently?
Ooh. Well, I can give one that I really like, because I was speaking at a conference called the Human Exposed last week, and actually it feeds rather nicely on Aurora's one about antibiotics earlier. And in the States, we have a real issue. We're talking to some people in the States later today, actually, but there's about 41 million prescriptions for antibiotics each year, and about 50% of those are seen as unnecessary or inappropriate. Can you believe that? 50%, so over 20 million. And what they decided to do was try to see what they could do to change that. And they basically did a lot of research looking at why doctors do it, a lot of behavioural research, longitudinal over time, talking to doctors, and eventually came to a number of interesting behavioural insights. But what it led to was a really simple thing. They got the doctors, and this may sound so simple, they got the doctors to sign a commitment letter, remember our commitment contract, that said they would avoid unjudicious use of antibiotics. And then what they did was really clever. They had to put the poster up in the surgeries where their patients were. And versus the control period, the control, antibiotic subscription went down from, say, 50% wrong to 33. So 50% inappropriate down to 33 in this just simple commitment bias. And interesting enough, in the control cell, it actually went up to 53%. Inappropriate, which is an extraordinary result from just, some deep behavioural insights and a commitment contract stuck in a public place that the doctor can see and the patient. So, and there's a lot of great examples, to be honest.
I think we're more than happy to if you had any other questions, I think you'll receive a little confirmation email with the access to the recording and some email address. So please feel free to share your question with Crawford and myself. And we'll obviously happily go back to you and answer them personally. That's it, I think, from our perspective. Thank you very much for attending today. It was a pleasure. It's a bit bizarre that people are not talking back at us, but
I feel as though I can see you all, even though I can't.
Thank you very much. We'll have a lovely day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.